I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 5th, 2026. We do have some important news to cover later in our broadcast, our live stream, especially as it concerns the ongoing situation in Iran. But for our theology roundup, and we always do the theology roundup first. And why do we do it first? Well, because when people in the future will go to look at a back episode, they will be looking for whatever subject we talked about. The news roundup is second because it is time sensitive and is, of course, pertaining to more immediate events, and it changes from day to day. Now, we just finished a multi-part, 10-part series on Romans 9, 10, and 11. That was also broken up, delayed a little bit for a number of days because we were in the process of upgrading our computer system here. And I trust that everything is going smoothly on your end because it is going relatively smoothly on our end. We're going to be discussing just a few miscellaneous topics today, tomorrow, and Monday. We will probably be getting into a multi-part series on the one law or one Torah controversy. I said when we got back from the IAMCS Rabbis Conference that I wanted to address something positive first before addressing something somewhat negative. Romans 9, 10, and 11, somewhat positive, although it was delivered because of the growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and what have you. Going through a multi-series on the whole one law, one Torah controversy, that is not so positive, but it is something which many of you have asked me to discuss, and the main part of it will be, of course, addressing those particular Torah passages which use terminology such as one law or one statute and what they mean, which is not something you frequently hear in that debate. Okay, but for today, I would like to briefly talk about, and I've titled this episode, A Small Window in Time, because it was a month ago. We were at the IAMCS Rabbis Conference in Orlando. That's one of the two major events we go to every year as a family, as a ministry. Rabbis Conference and also the Messiah Conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania. I'm sure many of you followed the different McKee Moment log entries that I posted, and you could tell that, and this is hardly a surprise, I held a few things back. The IAMCS Rabbis Conference is a leadership conference. It's for Messianic Jewish rabbis, rebbitzins, congregational leaders, elders, deacons. That is who the conference is for. And as a result of it being, of course, a leadership conference, there are many things which are discussed which are confidential. There's a lot of people who talk shop. And so you want to be sensitive to that. It doesn't mean that we were not permitted to post different things on social media during the conference. We certainly were. But there are a lot of people, they talk shop, they talk about some of the nuts and bolts of what it means to be in Messianic ministry, Jewish outreach, things which inevitably go wrong in serving people. And you want to be aware of that, and you want to sort through that as you report day by day. And in my case, I try to give a month, 6-week window after an event like that to finally discuss, one or two things which I found to be very important. Now, to be honest, when I went to the Rabbis Conference, I did not have very high expectations of people discussing current events or matters of when we are. And that's not a conclusion I came to very lightly, because I've seen what has taken place over the past year. I've seen when there have been some, really tragic things occur, whether the 12-day war, the recognition of an independent Palestine on Rosh Hashanah, what took place in Manchester, Bondi Beach. And I have seen not very many people talk about it in a Messianic Jewish context. It's just been like, oh God, another anti-Semitic event, but that's pretty much it. Not a lot of, we're going to pray for what just took place. We're going to recite Kaddish, and we're going to keep tabs on the intensity or the frequency of these sorts of things. So I didn't go with high expectations because I haven't seen people really wanting to talk about it and evaluate that question of when we are. However, I am pleased to say that there were more people talking about current events, rising anti-Semitism, what's going on in Israel, the Gaza issue, the emerging issues at the time in Iran, and there was one particular message. In fact, it was delivered by Eric Lakatos, the chair of the IAMCS right now, and he talked about how what is occurring in our world today, what's occurring in the Jewish community, represents an open doors actually, for outreach, for performing important ministry work. And that was very encouraging to me. So to be sure, though, not as many people as should be talking about what is going on right now. How does it affect us? How does it affect the development of our movement? What took place? And that is concerning. And that's one of the reasons why we have the kind of ministry outreach we've got. Now, as occurs at the final day of the Messiah Conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania, likewise, the final evening of the IAMCS Rabbis Conference, the final message, as long as I've been attending for 10 years of the Messiah Conference and now 7 years of the Rabbis Conference, the final message is given by Jonathan Cahn. And there are a lot of people in the IAMCS MJAA sphere of influence who believe that Jonathan Cahn is actually a prophet. There are other people who are Jonathan Cahn skeptics. And there are a few people who actually would consider Jonathan Cahn to be a false prophet. I haven't hidden the fact I'm much more in that Jonathan Cahn skeptic phase. And honestly, going back to when he first released The Harbinger, I consider Jonathan Cahn to be an exegetical basket case. I know that's not a very popular opinion, but I don't know his reasoning process, how he comes to some of the conclusions he comes to, because some of the conclusions he comes to with different Bible passages, I would not come to. But what he delivered the final night of the Rabbis Conference, and again, I'm looking at what needs to be communicated to the different leaders, to the different people there. He did deliver what I consider to be a rather contrived message, using themes of Jehu and Jezebel from the divided kingdom era period of ancient Israel, to then conclude that we, as the body of Messiah, have a small open window to perform some concentrated work. And he made comparisons between Jehu and Donald Trump and Jezebel and Hillary Clinton. Okay. And you can, many of you have probably heard that message delivered via Jonathan Cahn's many social media platforms. So I didn't listen to how he came to this conclusion because, again, I consider him to be an exegetical basket case. Sorry, that's just me. But there are people in that conference who needed to hear that we only have probably a small window in time. Now, for me, you don't need, contrived typology, Jehu, Jezebel, Trump, and Hillary Clinton to recognize that we may only have a small period of time. You should be able to discern that from a relatively surface reading of the Olivet Discourse, looking at different political things which have taken place over the past decade here in the United States of America, and be able to easily recognize how our religious liberties and freedoms are a privilege, but they are not guaranteed as permanent things indefinitely. Our religious freedoms and liberties here in the United States of America are privileges. I would even go as far as to say that they are luxuries, and we're not going to be able to have them forever. So if you can recognize that, you should be able to deduce that we have a limited window of time. We've been given some line extensions of time, and we have to make the most of them. Yet, because many people, whether you like it or not, in the Messianic Jewish community actually do consider Jonathan Cahn to be a prophet, perhaps this is the only way many congregational rabbis, leaders, etc., could have had communicated to them that we have a limited window of being able to make a concentrated difference with various religious liberties and freedoms. So that is, probably the main thing which was emphasized at this rabbis conference. And to be certain, we pray that different congregational leaders, rabbis, rebbitzins, Messianic pastors, Messianic teachers, whomever, elders, deacons, they take that to serious heart as they would go back to their congregations, back to their spheres of influence, and they recognize that we have a small window of opportunity. What's going to happen after Donald Trump leaves the White House? And already, people are not thrilled about what has been taking place, the division since the Charlie Kirk assassination on the political right here in America. Whether, you've got a division between those who strongly support Israel, they're Christian Zionists. You've got others who are more on the Christian nationalist side, and they believe we need to decouple fully from Israel. And again, and we also see some growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on that side. But what would a small window actually involve? What would it actually concern as we evaluate what we can do and what we can't do, whether you're talking about an individual, a family, an assembly or a congregation, or a Messianic synagogue? Well, it would mainly involve taking advantage of religious freedoms and liberties to speak out, to no longer stay silent because it's too inconvenient. The Messianic Jewish community has largely invoked upon itself the moniker of being the end time move of God, because we have, as a central part of our mission, Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, standing with Israel, standing against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and in working toward, as we discussed in our Romans 9, 10, and 11 study, that all Israel will be saved trajectory. So our mission is something which not only is going to involve seeing a mass number of Jewish people come to faith in Yeshua, it's going to culminate in the restoration of Israel's kingdom and the return of the Messiah himself, which is something very, very serious. And I don't think we often contemplate that. But as we consider what may only be a small window in time, we do have to acknowledge, and this is very uncomfortable, this is where I have to remind some of you that apologetics, while being about the defense of the faith, is not always about defending the status quo or defending things the way that they are. We do have to acknowledge how the Messianic community tends to more frequently be than not behind the curve on theological and spiritual matters. We always seem to be in this catch-up mode. We are not necessarily on par or on parity with the local synagogue or the local evangelical church in our community. So there are things which, after 30 years, and our family's been in the Messianic community since the fall high holidays of 1995. It was by the spring of 1996, we were fully integrated. So by the fall high holidays of 1996, we were really fully integrated. So, this year we're doing a lot of reflection back on where we were 1995, 1996, getting involved, getting called into the Messianic community. But I do have to say, and I can say this, after 30 years of our family being involved, generally speaking, although there are exceptions, but generally speaking, today's Messianic community still cannot easily address some of the subjects, some of the topics which my late father in his Sunday school class held from 1987 to 1992 could address. And that's not very good. And it does indicate how we are behind the curve in way too many areas. And I mean, look at the kinds of subjects we talk about when we do our news roundup and how they affect one's approach or understanding of the Bible. And it doesn't mean that, when we present an opposing point of view, when we access news sources which we're uncomfortable with, we're trying to endorse these ideas, but we are trying to recognize we live in the world and we need to respond properly to what is going on in the world. Too often, my observation has been, this is not a huge surprise for some of you, that the Messianic community does go out of its way to avoid issues of modernity and postmodernity. Oh, can you believe about woke? Can you believe about deconstruction? Okay, now how is that affecting the young men and young women in your assembly when they leave to go off to college, go off and start their career, whatever it is? Do they come back to the Messianic community or do they go off into the world? Issues of modernity and postmodernity matter to the Jewish community, and they matter to evangelicalism. And while there are Messianic congregations which will talk about the modern issues, there are many which go out of their way to avoid them as well. And that's not good. That does not facilitate congregational growth, the continuance of our faith community, of our movement. But it begs the question, well, if you want to call yourself an end-time move of God and you want to facilitate this massive end-time Jewish revival, and I've got issues with a lot of people who expect there to be a massive revival in the end times. I expect more apostasy. But I do believe that there will be many people, Jews, who come to faith in Yeshua. I do believe that. But if you're not able to easily address contemporary matters, then what kind of an end-time move are you? And these are not easy things to sort through. More practically, and this is what I spoke on when I delivered the 10-minute talk on avoiding newspaper eschatology. You don't have to be, like what we do on Messianic Insider, have a news roundup every day. When you go to your Messianic congregation or synagogue, you don't have to have somebody get up there and go through a dozen news headlines. You don't have to have a 10-minute, little video on what's going on in the world. But you do need to be able to have somebody, whether it's in the normal prayer time or even your main congregational teacher, speaker, get up there and before delivering the message, be able to mention 2 or 3 things which have happened in the past week or getting ready to happen in the next week, and say, keep these things in mind, keep these things in your thoughts and prayers. And that was the main challenge I issued during the 10-minute talk. I have no idea of knowing how many leaders that registered with, so they can go back to their assemblies and they can say, for example, this week, we've got some negotiations going on between the United States and Iran in Oman. over Iran's nuclear aspirations and support of terrorism and everything else. And along with that, we need to pray that the government of Israel knows how to properly respond, what actions to take regarding the Islamic Republic. I mean, it's something as simple as that, because if you are a congregational leader, your people look to you principally for help, for guidance, for solace when dramatic things happen. And, not everyone is going to get plugged into a live stream, a podcast like Messianic Insider. I wish they would, but not everyone is going to do that. And so ultimately, it does come down to, as a congregational leader, being able to help people not be totally shocked by what could happen in the world. Having a window of time, and I don't wish to be presumptuous, I was around for what took place in the late 1990s and the turn of the millennium. Many people came up with false end time predictions. They bet their lives, their reputation on things which did not materialize. Yet, since October the 7th, 2023, and I don't think the Messianic community is fully sorted through how significant that was and how that was probably the linchpin to see that evangelical Christian support for Israel, particularly the United States, is now waning. It's now on the decline. You can't just invoke Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, as your own, as your main talking point. You can't do that anymore. You have to be able to present a more comprehensive case regarding why God still has an important destiny for the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't think we've fully sorted through that yet. That, particularly among younger people, there might be, more attending church as a result of, say, the Charlie Kirk death, but many of them are getting plugged into replacement theology, supersessionist environments where support for Israel, support for the Jewish people is on the decline. And that means it's not business as usual. You can't be concerned about marrying and giving in marriage, eating and drinking, and those kinds of matters. I mean, when I go to a conference like this, I mean, to be honest, I probably get asked, or there are probably remarks made more about my marital status and being single as, a 45-year-old than, what is John's latest work? What's John's latest project? What is he, researching right now? And what is that reflective of? It's reflective of the typical days of Noah approach toward contemporary matters. It's not business as usual anymore. And what am I concerned about? Well, I'm concerned that we haven't fully sorted through the ramifications of October the 7th, 2023, the war in Gaza, declining support for Israel, in particular among millennials, Generation Z, and most probably Generation Alpha, that we don't have the environment we should always have where we can address those difficult matters of modernity, post-modernity, and that people have lost a sense of urgency for what the Messianic community is here to do. Now, I'm trying to play my part, Messianic Insider 5 times a week. That is not always easy. It is exhausting. Just having to, in the evening, compile my first round of news stories I've collected in the afternoon, and then later in the morning, another round of news stories. I mean, there are a lot of things which go on, and I don't always get as many positive comments, as many, hey, keep up the good work, as much as, well, you got this wrong, or you came to the wrong conclusion here. There's not as much of that positive, constructive spirit. But I do operate on the mindset of, we have a limited window in time, and it means we can't just do things the way we've always been doing them. We have to be able to recognize the urgency of the hour. 30 years ago, 1996, and I'll close with this before we get into our news roundup. 30 years ago, so this would have been February 1996. In October of 1995 was the Yitzhak Rabin assassination. And at the time, Shimon Peres was the acting prime minister of Israel, and a new election in Israel was anticipated. And that saw the first premiership of Benjamin Netanyahu. Likewise, in 1996, there was the Russian election, and Boris Yeltsin, of course, was reelected president of Russia. But that was just 5 years or so after the fall of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, in 1996, we also had the U.S. presidential election between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. And yes, the new millennium, the year 2000 was approaching, and there were a lot of people making unbridled remarks, speculation about things which proved to be false, but there was still much more of an urgency in the Messianic community, as I picked up, to be paying attention to what's going on in the world and be able to adapt your lives accordingly to that. With all due respect, I don't necessarily see that today in 2026. I see much more of what is depicted in the Olivet Discourse about days of Noah, eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. And it even affects how people have made or directed comments to my own self. So we'll see what happens, of course. We're here to make a difference while we can. We're here to make the most of every day. And we're here to help, as always, we're here to help facilitate stability, which is probably, I think, the most underrated commodity for today's Messianic community. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup. Tomorrow, I'm thinking we're going to have just of course, it'll be an important examination, but we're going to be addressing the usage of the plural we or us in some of the early Genesis narratives. I am presently working on combining our two books, Salvation on the Line, volumes 1 and 2, into a single, rather large book, similar to the New Testament Validates Torah Maximum Edition. So we're going to address the usage of the plural we or us in early Genesis. Does it support a plural Godhead or not? So I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of that. And then starting Monday, the plan is to begin a multi-part series on the whole one law, one Torah issue. All right, so let's transition over now to the news roundup. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. We are reminded to, number one, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, also the Iranian situation. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, we've got a lot of things coming out from the Epstein files and a lot of conclusions being drawn. All right, so all the stories I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today, excuse me, when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. So you can go watch the clips, read the articles in full, etc., whatever the case might be. All right, our first story, and this is from Instagram. This is Amy May. She is a very popular Christian influencer. You can watch this clip in its entirety, but basically she talks about the Epstein releases. Her conclusion: it is a command to be a voice for the voiceless, not an option. Expose the deeds of darkness. Now, she is mainly speaking about the Epstein files generally, not specifically, but she also goes into some of her background, some of her story, which is pretty compelling, excuse me, regarding what she's been through and how she identifies to an extent with, unfortunately, what much of the Epstein files are all about. Okay, our next. This is from Tuesday TV, and we're going to trace kind of a series of events. This is from 2:02 p.m. So this is what this would have been when we were live yesterday. Islamic Republic have calmed down after meltdown and asked U.S. to carry on negotiations as planned for Friday. So we know right now that when we were on yesterday that the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran over their nuclear aspirations and some of these other things, they were supposed to be held in Turkey. Then the Iranians wanted it moved to Oman. Then they said, no, we don't want it. And they canceled it. And then actually during our stream, I got a text message that it's back on again. And so far, as of right now, the negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are on. But we also know, because this is the Middle East, that these things can definitely change. Okay, here's a story. Here's a clip from NT Wright, which came across my feed on Instagram. So you can watch this in its entirety. Whether you like NT Wright or not isn't the point. But here, and apparently he's going through some kind of a study on Galatians, Professor Wright explores how Paul radically redefines the people of God through the Messiah's death and resurrection. Paul's own transformation from ultra-zealous Jew to Messiah person becomes the paradigm for all believers. Their identity is no longer rooted in ethnic descent or Torah observance, but in Christ and his faithfulness alone. Okay, now I'd like to just kind of unpackage that a little for you. Obviously, N.T. Wright, now we can learn from a lot of the things he proposes and he has suggested. I've certainly done that in a number of my studies and materials. But here he talks about how one's identity no longer rooted in ethnic descent or Torah observance, but in Christ and his faithfulness alone. Now, what N.T. Wright and others consider the faithfulness of the Messiah to be, and I actually agree with them on this, is the Messiah's, Yeshua's, willful obedience to the Father unto death for sinful humanity. And so one's identity as a believer in him, as a Messiah follower, is to be focused around Yeshua's completed work on the tree of sacrifice, right? Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection. And I have said that is the most important thing for us as believers. Now, unfortunately, where I think an N.T. Wright gets it a little wrong is identity no longer rooted in ethnic descent or Torah observance, as those seemingly are meaningless. And of course, one of the reasons why we have a Messianic Jewish movement today is because for centuries of Christian history, it was taught, and taught incorrectly, that a Jewish person who comes to faith in the Messiah of Israel stops being a Jew, starts being a Christian, and it was to dismiss with a lifestyle of Torah observance, principally things like the seventh-day Sabbath, appointed times, kosher eating, and circumcision, among others. And the Messianic Jewish community is here to say, no, that's not true. While acknowledging Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah is the most Jewish thing a Jewish person can ever do, a Jewish person can still live as a Jew and believe in Israel's Messiah, because after all, the first believers in Israel's Messiah were Jews. And it is not mutually incompatible to think that the most important thing for all of us needs to be Yeshua's faithfulness, the Messiah event, his obedience to the Father unto death for human sin. That absolutely needs to be the most important thing. But that doesn't mean that Jewishness, Torah observance is now to be completely discarded and dismissed. And there are plenty of Messianic Jewish believers I know, and I consider them my good friends, The most important thing to them is the completed work of Yeshua, his sacrifice for their sin, their appropriation of that sacrifice onto their heart. They're being spiritually transformed. And Jewishness is important to them, and they live a Jewish lifestyle, both with biblical things, Shabbat, the festivals, kosher eating, circumcision, and they observe a wide number of contemporary traditions. But that is secondary. Of course, we do encounter people in the Messianic community. The most important thing to them is their Jewishness, and the completed work of Yeshua is kind of an appendage onto that. Likewise, you encounter people in Christendom. Their identity is in who they are as individuals, whether they are shrewd in business, they've made a lot of money, whether it's in their looks, whether it's in their ethnicity. And believing in Jesus is kind of a secondary appendage to that. So we take posts like this from N.T. Wright. We recognize that, yes, Paul defined the people of God principally on and around the Messiah event. What Jesus has done for us via his faithfulness, his being sacrificed for human transgressions. But that does not mean that one's ethnic identity, and in particular, a Jewish person's heritage, is completely meaningless, and it's to be completely disregarded. And indeed, you're going to start seeing more and more, and I'm not necessarily saying it's going to come from N.T. Wright, but particularly on the Christian nationalist side, you're going to see more and more repeat tired, old, supersessionist lines that, Jewish people who come to faith in Christ stop being Jewish. They're to be a new identity, and where Jewishness doesn't mean anything. And frequently, you will actually see different Jewish people who have professed faith in Jesus as kind of their poster children, who are completely integrated into Christendom, not part of the Messianic Jewish movement. So this won't be the last time we talk about this, but I thought that was an important story to mention. Okay, back to more contemporary events. From the Jerusalem Post, the 4th of February. You can read this article in its entirety later, but the headline is, Iranian regime planned brutal protest suppression months ahead of outbreak, leaked docs reveal. An Iranian opposition group says top secret files outline a 4-stage crisis plan with internet blackouts and orders for IRGC forces to open fire on protesters. And indeed, right now, and even among people in the Messianic community, some people, we need to be better informed as to what this Iranian situation is. The downfall of the Islamic Republic would change, of course, the face of the Middle East. And in fact, it would probably accelerate that Daniel 9:27 70th week treaty. It would accelerate the period of, while they're saying peace and safety, then sudden destruction would come upon them. So we need to pay attention to this. And we're not told in Scripture how long that period of peace and safety is. I know more people than not think it's going to be a very short period of time. I consider that to be possible. I also think it could be a longer period of time, but it would be a very tense period of time as well. But we need to be paying attention to this Iranian situation. Okay, from open source intel yesterday, 4:05 p.m., February the 4th, when Prime Minister Netanyahu and IDF Chief Zamir both openly warn Iran not to attack, it means they have been briefed on something. Okay, so one of the advantages of looking to some of these open source areas, it means they're getting information which is not classified. Of course, a lot of us, we just pay attention to things all the time, whether it's the Gaza war, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, Venezuela, whatever the venue is, we're paying attention. But not everyone is doing so. Okay, here's an important opinion, and there is a 3-minute, 27-second clip to go along with this. I-24 News English yesterday at 1:04 p.m. So this was being broadcast while we were live. The Iranian regime is an expert at buying time. Changing the location and format of the negotiations was all about buying time. Okay, so if some of this wrangling about, well, we're going to have the peace summit, Iran, the United States, other players in Turkey. No, we're going to move to Oman now. It's only going to be the US and Iran. And, oh, no, we're not going to have it. Oh, the negotiations are back on. Is that just a typical Iranian ploy, as is concluded there, of buying time? And what would that mean, too, in the more immediate vicinity, the government of Israel? Does it have a sense of urgency to strike? And I put that with a question mark. What about the United States? Have they factored this in? I have to believe there are people who have. This is the Middle East. The Middle East doesn't do things the way we do things in the West. And I know that the tension is building, and a lot of people are expecting that sooner or later, whether it's Israel, whether it's the United States, whether it's both, we're likely to see some action taken. Okay, inside Israel intel on X, and this is from 3:21 p.m. yesterday. Netanyahu's cabinet meeting, originally scheduled for tomorrow, has been urgently moved up. Ministers received an urgent last-minute invitation regarding this change. Okay, so we take that for what it is. All right, let's change venues just a little bit. This is a post a lot of people have been passing this around, and it does merit some further investigation. But I know many of you have been caught unaware, in particular when you've seen different people on social media, X, Instagram, it's all over the place. They make certain quotations from the Talmud, and they use it to promote anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, etc. The most popular one is, the Talmud says that Jesus is in hell burning in feces, right? And to which a lot of people have responded with, well, one of the things you got to recognize is that the Talmud, as a collection of Jewish opinions, represents opinions on all sorts of things. And the rabbis don't always agree with one another. And the Talmud is a collection of commentary, a reflection of philosophy, and it's a plurality. There's no uniform voice in the Talmud. So, yeah, especially during a time in the early centuries of Christianity, when Christianity was actively persecuting Jews, there to be some negative things to be said about Jesus. Yet today, there are many Jewish people who have a lot of positive things to say about Jesus, to the point where, while they might not recognize him as Messiah, they recognize him as an important teacher, a reforming voice, even having some small p prophetic things to say to the Jewish community. And they would conclude that were Yeshua living today, he'd be part of the Jewish community, maybe even be Orthodox. So this cherry picking of the Talmud, it's not always good, but here's a useful thing to be investigated. I have filed it away from Eyal Yacobi, who concludes, stop trusting people who will lie so easily that they make up quotes. So you see some things here, different apparent Tanakh quotes, and then it decompressed just a little bit, mistranslation or taken out of context, fake translation taken out of context. And this is something you all need to probably place in your files. Now, right now, speaking of current projects I'm involved with, I am updating. It has not been looked at for 11 years now. Our commentary, 1 Corinthians for the practical Messianic, also working on salvation on the line. This year, we're going to try to get all of our commentaries updated. That leaves 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and then Hebrews. And I pray, because I've got a lot of open files on it, Lord, when do you want some new frequently asked questions entries to be added? So this is the kind of thing which definitely needs to have an FAQ entry. Of quotations in the Talmud about this or about that. And so there are going to be a lot of things, of course, which happen this year with what is witnessed on social media, but I'm glad somebody is pushing back. And indeed, from time to time, you and your local Messianic congregation, you need to have a presentation, not off to the side, but actually in the main Shabbat service about, what do we do about the growing anti-Semitism, and in particular, some of these quotes which are made from the Talmud, from Jewish literature. How accurate are they? How inaccurate are they? We are a Messianic Jewish movement which has theological roots in the synagogue. And when somebody comes up to us and they say, this or that, what do we do about it? And this is where I have to repeat that too many of us have lost some of that sense of urgency we had in the late 1990s. And yes, there was a lot of false predictions, false prognostications about the end times. But if something like this hit, it would be discussed almost immediately. If there were a major act of anti-Semitism, it would be discussed almost immediately. And we're just not seeing that now. Okay, from 2C TV, yesterday, February the 4th, and there's a 1-minute, 36-second clip. This is from 5:04 p.m. The regime tried to narrow the talks to only nuclear. That's the Islamic Republic of Iran. The U.S. said no. Nukes, ballistic missiles, terror proxies, human rights, everything stays on the table. The talks collapse. This regime can't negotiate without lying. Now they have begged the U.S. to resume the talks. So that's Tusi's opinion. Yes, and those of you who don't know who Tusi is, he is based out of London. He is Iranian. He's also Christian, but he interviews a lot of people who have left Iran, whether they live in the UK, Canada, the United States, etc. He also gets a lot of firsthand reports out of Iran and is trying to keep people up to date with not only what's happening in the Islamic Republic, what's happening in the Middle East. He's very pro-Israeli, very pro-American, and it's very, of course, critical right now to stay up to date with what is happening. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender, yesterday, 5:05 p.m., despite claims earlier today that planned negotiations later this week between Iran and the United States had collapsed due to disagreements on the location and topics, both the White House and Iran's foreign ministry have now stated that nuclear talks Friday afternoon will go ahead. Now, of course, we are reminded this is the Middle East, and if things have changed once, they can change again. So I'm expecting some kind of talks to actually go through at this point. But what's going to be achieved? That is, of course, the question we are wanting to see answered. Okay, another post from 2C TV, 7:05 p.m., February the 4th. The regime walked away from talks and then begged Arab states to pull the U.S. back in. His commentary, Washington isn't buying it. No red lines moved. Nothing gets done. This is stalling, not diplomacy. So stalling for what, if this is the case? And of course, this invites, what have the Prime Minister of Israel, members of his cabinet, members of the IDF, what have they been talking about? And if there's going to be some kind of action taken against Iran, who's going to make the first move? I know that's why there's so much tension right now. And of course, you also see some of what is occurring in the financial markets, different commodities, gold and silver going up, going down, going up, going down. The cryptocurrency market has plummeted in the past few days. People selling Bitcoin, among other assets. Yeah, the tension is real. You didn't just wake up wondering, what's going on right now. It's being affected across the whole system. Okay, here's a post from Disclosed TV. It's not the only venue. 43 seconds. 4:22 p.m. yesterday. Vice President J.D. Vance interviewed by Megyn Kelly. this has been getting a lot of traction across social media. New. Vance says Trump is definitely ushering in an America First New World Order. So, of course, whenever somebody uses the terminology New World Order, and one of the first people who used the term New World Order was uh, George Bush Sr. And that, of course, got a lot of people speculating, a lot of people coming to different conclusions. Uh, he wasn't the first person to use uh, Vice President Vance, not the first person to use New World Order, but whenever somebody uses it, we kind of like focus in like, okay, are they talking about the regime of the beast, the regime of the anti-Messiah? So a lot of people are understandably taking Vance's reference to a New World Order, even if it's an America First New World Order, and are speculating. Now, on one side, it's true. Perhaps there's some validity to how President Trump, what he's doing with as the peace president, cutting all these peace deals, trying to see the Middle East situation resolved, Gaza, now Iran, that what Trump is doing could be laying the groundwork for that end time beast New World Order. At the same time, give another alternative, the other point, the other thing which we have to keep in mind, if Trump is America First and he's a nationalist, he's not going to be too keen on some kind of a one world government or New World Order. And he's subverting the term New World Order with his own version. To be honest, we don't know. But what we do know is we have to be paying attention. We're living in a very tense period, and we have a small window of time in order to make a concentrated difference. So that's what we need to be focusing on as we sort through what did J.D. Vance mean by America First New World Order. Okay, the Epstein files. And you're seeing a lot of people respond in different ways to the latest tranche of Epstein materials. This is from Julie Roys and the Roys report posted yesterday at 4:46. This shows you the spectrum of how people are responding. Newly released Justice Department documents show Jeffrey Epstein shared a parenting article by Focus on the Family founder James Dobson in a private text exchange, renewing criticism of Dobson's teachings and their influence. So this is just kind of noting. I mean, I was, when I saw this, I'm like, how in the heck did Jeffrey Epstein know about James Dobson, much less refer to him? So you've got that part of the spectrum. And then, of course, you've got the other part of the spectrum, people speculating on, was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent? Was Jeffrey Epstein working for Russia? Was he compromised? Was he compromising people? I mean, you got this huge spectrum. And then associated with a lot of that is, well, Jeffrey Epstein was a Jewish, agent, and the Jews are controlling the world, and Zionism is bad, and blah, 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 blah. You got this huge spectrum of people who are pulling things from these Epstein documents. And of course, there's a lot that I have come across my social media feeds, but for me, the most important thing is, how do we recognize, for example, the things which directly impact men and women of faith, the things which directly impact the Messianic community per our Messianic mission, Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, standing with Israel, standing against anti-Semitism. So I'm going to be very targeted with the kinds of things I encounter from the Epstein documents. Okay. All right. Okay, now this is a little dated now, but it is from yesterday, but so I thought I'd just note it anyway. There's an 11-second clip here. That's NBC News, but open source Intel Defender posted at 10:04 p.m. Speaking during an exclusive interview Wednesday with NBC News, President Donald J. Trump stated that Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei should be very worried. though he makes it clear that negotiations are ongoing between Iran and the United States. So, what happens or what doesn't happen in the coming days regarding Iran, their nuclear aspirations? The president has said that the Ayatollah should be worried. So, that is something which I think is overarching to whatever comes or does not come, because ultimately it's the president of the United States who's going to decide what that massive buildup in and around Iran, naval, Air Force, Army, whatever it is, what is going to happen with that. Okay, let's switch over to, this isn't Russia, Ukraine, but it is Russia. Visegrad 24, 3:04 a.m. this morning, February the 5th, breaking: the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty between Russia and the United States has expired. Starting today, there are no longer any treaties regulating nuclear weapons between the two states. Although I do expect that the president will, and we got another report on this in just a moment, they're going to probably end up doing something, the U.S. and Russia. Regardless of what you think or don't think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia still has the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and that means that the country with the second largest nuclear arsenal, the United States, is going to have to do something about reduction of warheads. Okay, open source intel today, February the 5th at 9:32 a.m. Prime Minister Netanyahu on Iran, Foreign Affairs and Security Committee discussion highlights. So this was a meeting held regarding Iran, and the main point is he stated Israel is prepared to deliver a very hard blow against Iran far beyond June's conflict. And Netanyahu noted uncertainty over Trump's ultimate actions, but emphasized close coordination with him at all levels. So, if you will recall back to the 12-day war last spring, there were conflicting reports in terms of U.S. and Israeli cooperation, and then ultimately what you saw was Israel initiated what it labeled as Operation Rising Lion, and then later Midnight Hammer was when the B-2 bombers came in with their Buster bunker bombs. Now, we don't know what's going to happen or not happen today, but even with talks taking place in Oman, I still think it's very likely that we're going to see some kind of military action in the not too distant future. Of course, as a believer, my responsibility is still to pray for the people. Okay, we do have to pray because that's what we serve, the Prince of Peace, after all. And we pray for the people of Iran that they can see this Islamic Republic overthrown and some kind of constitutional monarchy be established. And hopefully, in that small window of time, some important work to be done in Iran for the good news or gospel. We also pray for the Messianic Jewish believers in Israel. We pray for everyone because ultimately it is Yeshua who is the only answer to this whole world mess. Okay, open source intel defender. This is from 10:43 a.m. today. The United States and Russia have agreed to reestablish high-level military-to-military dialogue between the two countries. So this indicates that some kind of an arrangement is possible regarding the conclusion of the START treaty. Okay, we've got 3 more posts to go through, and then we will conclude our stream. From the Jerusalem Post, you can read this article in its full later, but the headline is Trump envoy Witkoff lands in Oman for U.S.-Iran talks. The talks are scheduled to take place on Friday morning and will focus on Iran's nuclear program, despite U.S. requests to cover broader topics. Okay, so as of right now, the talks with Iran over their nuclear aspirations are probably going to proceed. Okay, to the Epstein matter. Now, we've talked about this week some stories reported on things, comments made by figures like Calvin Robinson, Dale Partridge, those on the Christian nationalist side who all I see are Jews mentioned and Israel mentioned and blah, 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 right? Now, there's another post circulating from the Epstein file. Some of you all may have seen this. This is Laura Loomer's commentary, and it involves how Jeffrey Epstein sent an email to Deepak Chopra that said, "I do not like Israel at all." So, who is Jeffrey Epstein? Who was Jeffrey Epstein? What did he believe? I do not like Israel at all. And this is where we are going to see a lot of conflicting opinions, a lot of conflicting conclusions. Those who conclude that Jeffrey Epstein was a Zionist agent, a Mossad agent, meant to compromise all of these, world leaders and important people to get them to do Israel's bidding. And here you see, I don't like Israel at all. There are going to be other things which probably circulate regarding his dealings with different Muslim leaders, Islamic people, Russians. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of things which come out from the Jeffrey Epstein files. And I would repeat once again, what did I say from the very beginning of this? Regardless of where you stand politically, you're on the left, you're on the right, you're in the center. The Epstein materials, how accurate, inaccurate, blatantly inaccurate they are, one major thing is going to happen. The trust which normal people have in their leaders, people of industry, people in entertainment, in sports, all of these, celebrities, it's going to plummet. Their reliability level that they place in, government, industry, banking, entertainment, whatever it is going to plummet. Who can I trust? Who doesn't have a skeleton in their closet? Who isn't compromised in some way? That is what's going to come from this more than anything else. And that is what should drive each one of us to God. That is what should drive each and every one of us to the Lord. And along with that, it's only in the Lord that we can find ultimate peace, ultimate truth, ultimate confidence, ultimate reliability. Because there are going to be a lot of people, whether they love Israel and the Jewish people, whether they despise Israel and the Jewish people, they're going to come to a lot of different conclusions from these Epstein materials. And there's going to be confusion. There's going to be confusion. There's going to be contradiction. There's going to be all kinds of not so good things resultant of this. Okay, so one final story, and then we will close up. And this is from the Jerusalem Post today. I'll just give you the headline. Iran agrees to discuss proxy terror, ballistic missile arsenal in U.S. negotiations, New York Times. The talks between Iran and U.S. are still set to focus on Iran's nuclear program and capabilities, New York Times noted, citing 3 Iranian officials and 1 Arab official. So the possibility exists for there to be some further discussions about the not only Iranian nuclear aspirations, but possibly also what Iran's going to do with some of these other matters. And to be sure, we definitely recognize how this is a situation which changes from day to day. And this is why we have to be in constant prayer. We have to be in constant intercession before the Lord. And we have to seek him and ultimately recognize that nothing happens without him being fully aware. Because that's only where our true trust and confidence resides. It resides in the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. And as always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. That will definitely help us, and it will go a long way with all the things we've got going on, day to day to keep going. If you haven't, please do check out my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can check out different back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, etc., and generally take a look at our ministry adventures over the years. And please do be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It will help our exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.